This is a Ben Frank Connection presentation.
All right, and welcome back to the Mancast Network, and welcome to episode number 1 of Adventures in Radiation, a Gamma World podcast. I am your host, R-Money. You may recognize me from some of our other Mancast Network shows. And I am here today to welcome you all to our brand new podcast. And this first episode is going to be a bit of an introduction to exactly what we're doing, what's going on. It may be a little bit of an introduction for those of you who don't know anything about tabletop gaming. If you are a tabletop gamer, maybe you don't know what Gamma World is. So this could be an introduction to Gamma World as well for you. But mostly we are here today to talk about our project, Adventures in Radiation, which we'll get into a little bit here. And to do that, we have brought in a special guest today. Our very first special guest, and it's sort of apropos that we bring this man in as our special guest. And so, without further ado, let me introduce you to the man who will be our GM, Game Master, for this adventure, Mr. Joseph Tamboro.
Hi, how you doing there, Mr. Money?
All right, well, I am fantastic. This has been a long time coming, so I'm pretty excited that we're actually getting a chance to go ahead and get this done.
Me too. We've talked about it quite a bit.
We have. All right, so I guess, the best part is to probably start at the very beginning here. Now, some time ago, we had had some discussions about putting together another Gamma World campaign. We had done this years and years ago in our youth.
Time.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been a while since we've actually been, actively involved with Gamma World, but I think it's something that we've always wanted to revisit.
Yes, very much so. Especially with the large number of other role-playing games that we've, played over the years.
Sure.
The one that we always seem to want to come back to is Gamma World.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason for that is, Gamma World is a very sort of unique take to it, especially during the time that it came out. It was, a very unique concept as far as, the tabletop landscape. And so yes. I think that a lot of people, who played back then or have had the opportunity to play this game since then, I feel like they have a very fond remembrance of that game. And so, I think it's, at least for us, I think it's sort of the perfect game to run this experiment with.
Well, it blends a lot of the different genres together.
Sure.
And it's in a very, unique world landscape where you have a blend of fantasy, science fiction, modern day. It's something that we can actually relate to more easily than a lot of the other, RP systems and campaigns settings that are out there.
Absolutely.
But yet it still has that flavor of being something, kind of wild and woolly.
Sure.
In some cases, literally.
Oh, exactly. And we'll get into a little bit about Gamma World itself for those of you that are unaware of what we're talking about here, but let's kind of start at the beginning. I think it's probably important because I would imagine that there are people out there saying to themselves, well, okay, so we're going to be listening to this podcast, which we should tell you right off the bat. The podcasts are not going to be like this podcast is today. This is basically, your introduction to our world and what we're doing here. But basically, we're going to be running an actual Gamma World campaign. We are going to live mic the Gamma World campaign and just let it roll. Now, I know that this has been done before. Typically, this is done with some type of Dungeons and Dragons campaign, but I'm not exactly sure I know of anybody that's done this with a Gamma World campaign. So I think a lot of people out there are probably wondering to themselves, okay, so, who are these people? Who's this Joe guy? Why is he running the game? What's going on? So I think that we take a look at, maybe the beginning. So having said that, let's talk about how you got into tabletop gaming.
Well, to do that, we're going to have to go in Sherman's Wayback Machine.
Well, I'm fine with that. We've got plenty of time, and
Okay.
we're good to go.
I'm an old man, so to
He's
be,
not. Wait. When you say that you're an old man, you're not like literally an old man. You don't have like the 4-foot long white beard, or you're not at the you're not at the senior action center every week playing canasta.
No, I'll be 46 this year.
Wow.
So I've been at
Jeez.
this for a while, especially
It's
when
over.
yeah, tell me about it. Especially when I tell you about how old I was when I started.
Okay.
The very first time I ever picked up a set of dice, I was 8 years old.
Wow. That is going back a good bit.
Yes, it is.
So how does an 8-year-old get into this kind of thing?
Well, to be fair, I was always very much into fantasy and sci-fi genre stuff. Again, we're really going in the Wayback Machine here.
Sure.
But at the time, there were these books, and they were usually called Which Way Adventures, and then they were later Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Sure. Yeah.
And there was a various different worlds. Some were more fantasy, your Dungeons and Dragons-esque. Some were space. There was all kind of stuff in between, depending upon where you were in the series.
Sure.
And that was kind of where I started because I always liked to read. I was your stereotypical geek as a child.
Okay.
I have no problem. I will claim that with great joy.
Sure.
And what happened was a couple of my friends, one in particular, got his hands on one of the old Dungeons and Dragons boxed sets, the basic edition.
Sure. Yeah.
And if you really remember, it was that rather cool red box
Oh,
that
yeah.
had the dragon and stuff on it.
Yeah.
That sells for like God knows what now.
Well, and that's coming back. They're doing a lot of really cool things with that now.
Okay.
If you look on Amazon, and I don't know if it's out yet or not. I know it was up for pre-order, but those of you out there that have watched Stranger Things, they've actually made a box set that is
Oh, that's great.
the Stranger Things box set, and basically it looks like the original. It looks like the box from the show.
That's cool.
And they have specific pre-made character sheets and pre-made adventures so that you can actually play the adventure that they played in Stranger Things.
Oh, that's really neat.
Yeah.
That's something I have to look for.
So
I'm
so
interested
this is like becoming it was cool back then and now it's cool again kind of thing.
Well, and that what's really neat about that is if you go back to those box sets, it ran through a basic, expert. I don't remember I think it was a companion, and then there was one after that. It was like for your ultra level for almost dealing with godlike characters.
Yeah.
And we played through most of the first three. We actually went back to get some of that other stuff from the fourth box set later.
Sure.
But from there, we fairly quickly, I would say within 2-3 years tops, we transitioned to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons back when it was real Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
When you actually had to do math and it wasn't Stoner D&D.
Yeah, it's
Sorry, folks out there. I got to
Well-
be honest. I'm a little bit of a I don't know. Some would argue elitist, but I don't think it's quite that.
no, I think you're more of an originalist.
Yes.
You like things the way they used to be. Various stacks of charts and
Yes.
number tables, and if you want to figure out how to cast your wizard spell, here's 17 different pages, read them in order or else.
Oh yeah, I mean
know.
that was what we did, and what's amazing is it worked for us.
Well, sure. I mean,
know.
if you grow up on that kind of thing, that's I mean, these days, if you look at the systems these days, I mean, everybody, if you're not playing a D20 system, then everybody's lost.
Well, right, because God forbid somebody ask you what your THACO.
Well,
is.
I will say that it can be. I mean, it can be a bit much the first time you sit down and you look at it and you're like, holy crap, where do I start? Because there is a lot to it. There's a bit of a learning curve to the system.
Well, but one of the things that I used to like about that system a lot, though, was there was just a metric ton of flexibility. But even with the flexibility it had, it demanded more of its players because you didn't actually have all these kits. I mean, I can remember when Unearthed Arcana came out. And one of my favorite characters at the time was actually a paladin.
Okay.
And when they subclassed that as a cavalier, I made my DM's life absolutely hell.
Sure.
The last thing you wanted to do was make my paladin character more powerful, and boy, did they do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, we stayed. I don't want to get hung up on this one too much,
Sure.
but that was really my very first experience
Okay.
of hardcore tabletop role playing. But and this even goes back. I can remember with this, we even used miniatures a little bit,
Okay.
and
Sure.
and this takes me back. What's very near and dear to my heart was good old Ral Partha. Because again, the other thing you have to remember is at this time it was still TSR.
Yeah.
The great Lord of Dungeons and Dragons was still Gary Gygax. Let me try that again. Gary Gygax.
Yeah.
It's like trying to cast a spell while you have a feeble mind on you there. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But we had the Ral Partha miniatures. I can remember saving the pennies and the allowance and cutting grass to order these things, and then sitting there and spending hours painting them.
Sure.
And that was actually back when people could be trusted with lead, and we could
Yeah.
actually sit there and heat them and very gently sometimes change positions or make subtle adjustments to our
Sure.
miniatures to personalize them. And we were actually pretty good at it. We even had the burns to prove it.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing at that point was, we didn't have a lot of these, nifty newfangled gadgets for maps and drawings and stuff.
Sure.
We were a bunch of poor coal region kids, so we had grease pencils and plastic sheets,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and that's what we used.
Yeah.
And when I think about the hours we spent on it, it was unreal. Kept us out of a lot of trouble,
Sure.
but that's the root. From there, I have a strong love of science fiction, and as much as I enjoy fantasy worlds and dragons and wizards and bears, oh my,
Sure.
there's something wonderful about shooting through the galaxy, with your various weapons and missiles and lasers and to steal a little bit of a term from Star Wars, blasters.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fun to it, and one of the things I liked about the particular system I got into next, which was called Star Frontiers, which is one that's not really well known.
Yeah. You don't really
You
hear
don't
that
really
too
hear much,
though.
and it's unfortunate because it was a ton of fun. And rather than using a 20-sider for most of your actions, everything was based in a percentile system.
Okay.
And one of the things that we loved about that was having a bonus of 1% could actually make or break what you were trying to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that was one of the things we sort of kind of fell in love with
Right.
about that one. And we played that for years. I had quite a few characters. In fact, if we ever come back to that, I have quite a few interesting stories from
Sure.
people who did some rather entertaining things.
Yeah.
From there, we branched out a little bit into everything from the Ghostbusters role-playing game
Oh, wow.
to Star Wars to Top Secret, which we played for a very long time.
Yeah. Top Secret, a sort of
A spy game.
fan
Yes.
favorite guilty pleasure game.
Yeah, absolutely. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And then from there, we played very, very briefly, and I truly mean briefly, with it was a system called Torg, Torg.
Oh, yeah. I've absolutely heard of that.
and it was different. We struggled with that one a little bit. It just didn't quite work as well for us.
Sure.
Excuse me. I'm not entirely sure why, but that one didn't take.
Yeah.
I look back on it, and I still have the books, and occasionally I'll page through it, and I'm not entirely sure what our problem was at the time, but
Yeah.
I think we just had other things we preferred.
Well, yeah, I think sometimes, when you get yourself set in one particular system or you find something that you really truly enjoy, it's hard to find something else that is going to be as easily accessible to you, simply because you find that when something works so well for you, whether anything else is a good system or not, it just doesn't work as well for
Well,
you.
no, I agree with you completely. Right around that time, I guess, is when we discovered Gamma World.
Okay, so here we get into Gamma World.
And to be fair, I think I had the game well before that, but it wasn't something that we attacked right away.
Right.
And then, because there were this thing has gone through many revisions, and I'm about
Sure.
90% sure, again without having it directly in front of me. I think it was the equivalent of third edition
Okay.
that we had.
All right.
And for all the folks out there listening, if I'm wrong, I apologize. But this is the edition where everything was pretty much resolved on a giant chart.
Okay.
And it also used a lot of the percentile dice to determine actions,
Okay.
which is one of the reasons that we liked it, especially coming off of games like Star Frontiers and even Top Secret used a lot of the percentile dice.
Okay.
And what turned out to be, I mean, some of my buddies were just hardcore Dungeons and Dragons guys and couldn't quite make the adjustment, so they didn't play a whole lot.
Right. Right.
But for the rest of us, I think Gamma World really became our bread and butter because it was, in some ways, the most flexible, wild, do whatever you want kind of a campaign that you could possibly have. I don't know, I guess maybe now is a good opportunity to talk about what Gamma World is.
Sure, and I think to go back to one of the points you made earlier when you were talking about, how you always related more to the sci-fi genre than
Yes.
maybe the fantasy genre with elves and wizards. The sci-fi genre lends itself, I think, and again, obviously Dungeons and Dragons was what put this all on the map, and
Yes,
that's like the
absolutely.
sort of, I mean, that's revered as the be-all end-all of tabletop gaming. I mean, most people don't know what tabletop gaming is, but if you say Dungeons and Dragons, they've at least heard of it. But with the sci-fi genre, it's so wide open, and it's specifically wide open because you're looking at you're looking at an untold vast universe. I mean, think about the difference between, say, Star Trek and Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Lord of the Rings is very sort of linear within that specific world that they've built, but it's meant to be that way. You're focusing on one type of specific thing, I think, whereas something like Star Trek, it is so wide open. I mean, the expanse of the universe is basically your playground.
But and it's interesting because I was just thinking there were a few other systems that since then that I've played that I think might be worth just tossing out there. Mm-hmm. I've dabbled with Pathfinder. I have very mixed feelings about Pathfinder. I'm not going to kid you.
Sure.
I think there are some strengths to it, but I think there are some gaping holes in it too.
Yeah.
Which I found to be somewhat frustrating. Another one that I've played with a bit is Alternity, which is also very much Alternity is kind of an interesting system because it's almost an inversion of your standard D20 approach.
Yes.
And I really do like the skill system on that, and they do offer the fantasy. Or excuse me. There is kind of a fantasy type setting.
yeah.
But they also have a strictly sci-fi space one, and then they have another one. I think it's called Dark Matter.
Yeah, and that's like Supernatural. That's
Yes.
that's like a cross between Supernatural and the X-Files. And
Yes, exactly.
It's got elements of all that stuff.
Yes.
It's very much.
And that's actually neat. And then the other thing that I've kind of played with a bit is the straight D20 modern system.
Yes.
And pardon me. And as a result of that, just as another footnote before I get back to the Gamma World, I do have a couple of homebrews out there.
Sure.
That sort of blends some of these together. Mm-hmm. That's kind of its own animal, which they're a lot of fun.
Well, the D20 is okay. I like the fact that there is a sort of set specific system that you can basically take any setting and plug in. So I think that it has intrinsic value.
Yes, it does.
And I think the Alternity system gives us a really good example of how you can really enjoy and sort of really relate to one system, and then out of nowhere, a system that you look at because it's roll low. It is very much, like you said, the inverse of Dungeons and Dragons, and you look at it and you think to yourself, this is never going to work. This is just weird.
Yeah,
So then you sit down and you play it, and every single roll you have, 3 specific numbers that tell you exactly what you need to hit for what, level of success or failure you're going to have. And playing it was just like a breath of fresh air. Like, it was so surprising how well it worked.
I agree completely with that.
Yeah.
And just as an interesting footnote, I keep wondering if that can somehow be dealt with within Gamma World, but that's a subject for a
Oh,
later
sure. 'Cause-
discussion.
Well, I mean, if you look at some, and it may even be the most recent edition, I'm not 100% sure, but one of the later editions of Gamma World that was introduced, I think, a few years ago is Modern D20.
Right.
Even
okay.
they've gone Modern D20. I know it's one of their editions is Modern D20. So it's like, it's got some sort of value to it if you don't feel as though you want to take the time to learn another, to learn another huge system. But, playing Gamma World with the original system, how it was intended, I mean, that's all part of the experience.
Well, and actually part of the fun part about that is if when we were talking before, it's not just a question, and the one that I think we were really discussing with the possibility of using for this is the old third edition. Because one of the keys to really sort of flesh out some pieces that are missing, and again, another blast from the past, when there were an awful lot of wonderful articles in Dragon Magazine back in the day, that were just just absolutely wonderful. Everything from additional mutations to skills to cryptic alliances. Cryptic alliance is kind of your secret society kind of stuff.
Sure.
To even annoying, sometimes devastating, but epically fun to play defects for your characters. And when we talk about what this looks like, we'll explain that one a little bit more.
Sure.
But these articles from Dragon Magazine were wonderful, especially at the time, because they really did fill out sometimes little gaps in what the original, books and scenario descriptions provided.
Sure, because I mean, and you find this a lot today too with certain games, especially your sort of mega tabletop board games. You find where it seems as though the setup or the instructions or how they're telling you how the system works is it almost seems like it's intentionally vague to sort of force the people that are playing to kind of make some of their own decisions and make some of their own interpretations. And I back then, who knows if that was even an intentional thing. It could have just been these gaps just sort of came up and they just didn't bother to do anything about it. But it's nice to see that before there was the internet to take care of these things, you had things like Dragon Magazine that would remedy these things for you, give you at least and it's almost it's almost like a precursor to downloadable content.
Oh, I agree. Yes, absolutely. Just as an interesting footnote, the thing that sort of jumped to my mind, and it goes back to the Dungeons and Dragons days, when all of a sudden we had characters who were actually beginning to raise armies.
Oh,
we had
sure.
no idea how to do army clashes. Well, guess what? We found an article in Dragon Magazine that gave us some mechanics for it. And, that was super duper useful. And it's little things like that that can help you flesh out everything you want to do. And yet it doesn't have to stifle the creativity. I remember one of the things that they changed in the D&D realm that sort of drove me nuts was all of a sudden they started creating all these kits. And I get it. I don't want to say that it's the worst thing, since moldy bread, but I think it reaches a point where either you're overwhelmed because you have so many choices.
Sure.
And you're trying to figure out what you're going to do, what is it like, or everything becomes so specialized that I just think it takes something away. And and it limits your ability to experience more of what the game can offer. Once you get into that realm of things, as far as I'm concerned, now you're playing in someone else's imagination.
Oh yeah, some of these things reaches a point where, and again, this is going to be another topic for another time, but I think this gets into very much where certain GMs or DMs will get too dependent on a book or a system rather than making the decision on their own. And I feel like that's sometimes a symptom of today's gaming generation, simply because they were not around to experience things as they were when tabletop gaming was first sort of birthing itself and you becoming a thing. They didn't know the joy of sending away for something in the mail and waiting for it and it arrives, and you miss so many of these things.
Well, I it goes back to I know you've heard me say this before, but there's a difference between gaming and role playing.
Oh yeah, we talk about that all the time because you can sit down at a table, and we can do this very easily because we have had the experience of playing with both types of people where you can sit down and you can look at somebody and you know that they are simply a gamer, because there is a difference in gaming and role playing. They are two completely different things. And I think that's part of, again, the problem with today's generation, because how many times have you seen, and this sort of drives me nuts because this is again taking away from the experience of playing a tabletop game. How many times do you see a gaming group sit down and at least one, sometimes two or more, have laptops out and they're running apps on their cell phone? And I get that it can maybe make it easier for some people. I understand that, but you will never know the joy of having a yellow legal pad or a 3-section notebook filled with pages of stuff. You'll never know the joy of having a binder filled with graph paper full of maps, and that's part of the experience. That's why you tabletop instead of MMO.
Well, and actually, that brings up you moved right into my next point. I can remember now, and again, we're going back a number of years, the very first time Dungeons and Dragons created an online MMO game.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I resisted it for a long time because, as far as I was concerned, it was heresy, maybe even blasphemy.
Sure. Yeah.
Because, when I was a kid watching the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon with the little barbarian and the grumpy cavalier and the ranger with the energy bow and the goofy mage who pulled everything but what he was supposed to out of his hat. Okay, that's fine. I loved it. I lived to watch that.
Yeah.
However, I do not believe that this kind of stuff translates terribly well into a video game format. I've played MMOs. I don't hate MMOs. Okay, let me back this train up. I do not hate MMOs.
I do. Just in case anyone was wondering. Even though I play one, I absolutely despise MMOs.
I'll tell you what I've played in terms of MMO.
Okay.
Okay. One was World of Tanks.
Okay. Right.
That's that kind of bordering on sci-fi-ish battle tank.
I have trouble with tank mechanics. I will not lie. I have tried World of Tanks, and I have rage quit more than once over tank mechanics.
Well, I can never say that I've never rage quit.
You rage quit for different reasons than I do.
Well, fair enough. I'll give you that.
I should get that on a t-shirt. I rage quit MMOs over tank mechanics.
Yep. I gotcha.
Yes.
I've played World of Warcraft.
Who hasn't, except for me?
Well, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. Again, it's not terrible, but
see, okay,
I have issues. Actually, I have less issues with the game and more sometimes with people's attitudes who are playing it.
Okay, sure, that's fair.
And I think that's true on that.
Yeah.
I've also played Final Fantasy 14. I enjoy that. I don't have a whole lot of time to devote to it.
I will say, as far as Final Fantasy 14 goes, which is the only one that I play, but I will say that I feel like Final Fantasy 14 does a better job of sort of limiting your interaction with others to the point where I feel like people's attitudes don't necessarily cause a ton of issues for the most part. I have only really had one single bad experience on there. Otherwise, for it being an MMO, I kind of keep to myself a bit.
I agree.
I get when I go on there at very specific times for very specific purposes. Like, I have an hour or two to kill here, and I know that, I want to get my, tribe quests done for the day. Or
I have never been able to sit for an hour or two.
Yeah.
Every time I try to sit down and play the game, if I don't have 3 or more hours, it just doesn't work. Which is and that's on me. That's not on the game.
Right.
But I don't have that level of discipline with it, especially if I start crafting.
Sure.
Then it's over.
So okay. So any other MMOs you play? Is that it?
I think it was World of Warships I tried briefly.
Oh, okay, sure.
And then there was a World of Warplanes was the other one. World of Warplanes absolutely made me want to stab my own eyes out.
You were very much in the very sort of world of kind of games.
Well, that was called World of Crash. My playing every chance I had. But yeah, and I kind of did that again, mostly because when I do have enough time to really devote to it, my preference is more of the tabletop.
Sure.
And even some of the more ginormous board games.
Oh yeah,
those I like. I mean,
those are the thing about that is those are very time consuming.
There we go.
If you're gonna sit down and play one of those, we've played.
3 hours.
Yeah, we've played Gloomhaven.
Yep.
We've started, but again, the problem with that is finding the time to make that work. And then I've also played Twilight Imperium, which is
that one I've not tried yet.
Well, that is a space epic.
Well,
and you're playing an alien race that's trying to keep your own planets, inhabit new planets, but there's as much warfare as there is in it. There's diplomacy as well.
Sure.
So
that sounds like a board game version of Master of Orion.
Okay.
That's a computer game I played like a lot of.
Yeah.
Of course, any game that I can shorten its name to Moo, I feel is something that I need to be involved in. But yeah, way back when the dinosaurs ruled the earth when I was still a kid, Milton Bradley had a Masters series of games.
Oh,
there
yeah.
was the Dragonlance, there was Buck Rogers. It was the same kind of thing as Axis and Allies, but they were very different. I mean, I God knows what happened to them. I wish I still had them, but that was, again, a long time ago. Sorry for the noise in the background, just in case you heard that. My cats decided to have a hissy fit with each other.
Fantastic. Love cats. Okay, so all right, so getting kind of back to our tabletop gaming here. Before we really specifically get into Gamma World, all right, so let's talk about a little bit about your sort of GMing experience here.
My GMing experience?
Yeah, when did you really start getting into the role of, sort of running your own games?
Actually, very early.
Okay.
When we first started with the box sets, there were 3 of us that did take turns running the campaign.
Okay, sure.
I didn't do it as much as some of the other guys because at that point I just sort of enjoyed playing. And it was one of those things where I here we go. Might as well just get this out of the way right now because this is the perfect opportunity for it. I was always a big fan of creating all of my own adventures.
Okay.
Which meant all of my maps, all the storylines, and we're talking as of 8, 9, 10 years old. It was just I enjoyed the process.
So this was something that you knew very early on in your gaming career that was your thing. You were very early on.
And I was notorious, and I used to drive everybody nuts because I had very, very elaborate maps. Okay. I can remember as a young kid going out and my parents staring at me as to why I went out and bought protractors.
No.
Well, I needed those arcs just right on my graph paper so that I could make whatever castle or dungeon or whatever I wanted to do look perfect.
Sure.
My father, God bless him, was he was a construction electrician. So he would sometimes look at my maps and he'd sort of stare at me, having him looked at all kind of schematics and things. And he would just shake his head and go, well, as long as you know what you're doing, have fun.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, your dad was a pistol.
Yes. And, he would just... He could never completely wrap his brain around it, especially when he started swearing at the dice. But that's, again, stories for later.
Sure.
But I literally designed the entire adventure from stem to stern And pardon me. In typical fashion, it was stock. Most of the stuff we did was dungeon crawls.
Sure.
At the
Yeah.
time, because we were just learning. But I would literally sit there and I would have every room labeled. I would have my description written. I would have everything I needed there. Like it was like the master tome, because it wasn't like there were 5 rooms or 10 rooms. If it was less than 50, it was kind of tiny.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And then I was famous for having multi-levels where you crisscrossed and did all kind of crazy stuff.
Sure.
Because I discovered that not all graph paper was 1/4 inch.
Yeah.
No. You had big boxes with a whole bunch of tiny ones in the middle, and you could
Yeah.
change your scale. That was like, being struck in the head by divine revelation once we realized we could do that.
So there was someone out there, or may still be someone out there who's living you supported as they made graph paper.
Oh, there is no
because
question in my mind.
You were a graph paper connoisseur. I hear
Yes.
you talk about it now, and you get this look in your eye when you talk about graph. It's the weirdest thing because I mean,
Yep.
you get this look in your eye when you talk about graph paper, and it's hilarious. But I understand.
Well, and the reason I point this out is because the gentleman who did most of our dungeon mastering very early on was not the most creative sort.
Okay. All right.
And when we ran characters through his particular campaign, and I use that loosely because what it meant was your characters went from, and they you can find them now, they're called modules. And they are effectively pre-made adventures designed for characters of certain levels.
Sure.
And really, if you're going to use those, all you have to be able to do is read the same kind of stuff that I used to put together for myself.
Okay. Yeah.
And we would kind of bounce from module to module to module. And that was the extent of what the campaigns would be. And then when we started to gain a little bit more power and our characters crawled up in levels, all of a sudden we wanted to do terrible things like build our own strongholds.
Yeah.
Whoa,
Yeah.
time out.
Yeah.
So that was very challenging. And then another gentleman I knew, actually, of all places, from my home parish at the time, was our advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So we went from this to a homemade campaign where the very first thing we did was we had to adventure through parts of the 9 hells because we were going after was it Demigorgon? And I remember our first few adventures in there, in these pubs in the infernal plane, some very wild things happening based upon some kind of dumb stuff, like our thief decided he was going to try and pick a greater demon's pocket as he was drunk. Fortunately, he passed out on the characters. We didn't die. It was great. But you went from this pre-made adventure to all of a sudden anything can happen.
Sure. Yeah.
And we really got to see the difference. So I guess where I'm coming from here is I think there is a place for pre-made adventures. I mean, when you're in a bind and you just need to put something together and you want to go, that's great.
Sure.
But if you want a real campaign that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, where you're looking at doing something more than getting enough gold or whatever the currency is accumulated to open a fruit stand for your character, then you need that greater flexibility.
Oh, absolutely.
And part of that greater flexibility is not getting bogged down in mechanics. Mechanics are important. Don't misread me.
Sure.
You need them because you need a way to determine what happens, what's a success, what's a failure, what constitutes, say, an epic or a legendary success because it never should have been possible, but you've accumulated whatever resources, I think it was Top Secret, they had luck points.
Okay. All right.
And you could spend these luck points to do all kind of crazy things and get extra rolls. One of my characters was famous. Every time he spent a luck point, he'd roll a dice and he'd end up getting 2 back. It was like phenomenal.
Sure.
Couldn't do it with any other character but that one.
Yeah.
But it let him do all kind of, crazy movie-like things.
Sure.
Jumping off of a 3rd floor, swinging on the chandelier, shooting 2 people, headshots, and landing in a crouch. and blowing the smoke off his gun and
Sure,
surviving.
yeah.
I mean, it was, crazy stuff.
Yeah, of course.
But that's part of the fun at times.
Yeah.
So I guess where I want to go with this is to say, I learned very quickly that in any of the games, and to be fair, I ran a ton of Star Frontiers.
Yeah.
That was a staple. I ended up then running a metric ton of Gamma World.
Yeah.
I did run some Dungeons and Dragons in between. I enjoy that.
Sure.
But one of the things I have to be very honest with is in every single one of these, I even did some Top Secret. I had a lot of, we developed house rules
Sure.
to sort of cover things that we otherwise didn't quite have the mechanics for to deal with, or things that the players really wanted
Yeah.
and weren't necessarily provided for. Because as cool as these games are, you're going to need to make house rule adjustments
Oh, absolutely.
for these situations.
Yeah. The way I look at it, really, a really simple rule of thumb is that mechanics should not dictate creativity. Creativity should dictate mechanics.
Oh yeah, you can't say it any better than that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's for.
And I mean, you look at, for example, the homebrew that I ran.
Yes.
I tried to do everything that was completely different than what you would see in a tabletop game. And even though I was using an established system for mechanics, I think my game, more than any other game I have seen, specifically turned the mechanics on their head while still,
Yes.
because every single character had their own special abilities that dictated how the mechanics worked for them.
Yes.
It was completely different. So, every person had a specific understanding of how the mechanics worked, and everything was based on their creativity. Everything the campaign sort of wrapped itself around the creativity of the players. And I specifically made it that way so that everything would feel organic, because everything is based on the creativity of the players, the storyline, everything that happened. I mean, it was honestly like the choose your own adventure of a tabletop game. Now that
You're
I think
right.
about
That's
it.
a really good
And this
analogy.
this is something we'll do because I think this is a great subject. We'll do a specific episode at some point. Maybe we'll take a little break during our campaign run and just do an episode on homebrews, because you and I are both
Yes.
ridiculously in love with the idea of homebrews. We've both done our own homebrews. I feel like we're really in a good position to kind of effectively talk about homebrews. So that's
agreed.
something that I think eventually we will sit down and do, because we've got a lot to say about that. So getting back to your experience as a GM, your gaming experience, I did want to ask you one question, because I always wondered about this, because you were, again, getting into Dungeons and Dragons and tabletopping at the time of sort of like the birth and the genesis of everything, when it's really kind of taking off and getting big. Did your parents ever look at you and say, that's devil stuff, you shouldn't be doing? Was that your parents, or, because I can see that 100% being your mother? Your dad, I could see him just looking at it like you said, and whatever.
At first, no. Then after a while, there was a lot of nonsense on TV.
Yes.
And then it did come a point where they did not want me to play Dungeons and Dragons, which is sort of what forced my hand into a lot of the other systems.
Yeah.
Which was, to be fair, I think in the end a good thing.
Sure.
Because it did give me a better breadth and depth, and it gave me a lot more RP exposure.
Of course. Yeah.
That otherwise I probably wouldn't have had. And a lot of what it was, and it, for better or worse, I don't really care, what system it is. You get together with friends, you're having a good time. It doesn't matter if you play for 2 hours or 20 hours.
Sure.
And it was not unusual on weekends for us to pick somebody's house, effectively pitch a tent in a living room
Oh,
or a
yeah.
dining room,
Oh yeah.
and we would marathon campaign.
I can't tell you how many times, I can't tell you how many times I slept over on the floor in your living room.
Yeah.
Growing up. Just
Absolutely.
You play until you pass out.
Pretty much. And then, we all made sure we saved our money so we could order Domino's.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I do remember those days.
The
Man.
midnight Domino's call back when it was a thing. And,
Oh yeah. God.
the only place that was
so
still
much
open.
fun.
Yes.
That was so much fun. But yeah, I do remember many nights. And I think part of what helped the situation, at least maybe in your certain situation, your house was a very habitated house. I mean, your house
Yes.
was frequently used, despite the fact that sometimes squeezing all of us in around the kitchen table.
Oh, was that a
I
bear.
mean, that was like.
Well, actually, no, that was the dining room table. That was before we did any of the remodel.
That was like a circus trick.
Yes, it was.
Trying to get
it was a
everybody in
clown
there.
car, but a room.
Yes, it certainly was. But you know what? We made it work every time. We'd have card tables next to the table with stuff on it. We'd do whatever we needed to do to get everything in there.
Yes.
But
Like
see, those are the kind of experiences that people these days don't get. You know what I mean?
Well, and I'm going to be honest with you. I think this is one of the things that gets lost sometimes with this whole video game MMO stuff. Because one of the, and I can remember having this argument with people who were really down on role playing in general. It didn't matter whether it was Dungeons and Dragons or Starfrontiers. It was all the same when it was all the work of the devil for some people. Because oh my god, you couldn't distinguish reality from fantasy. And my whole thought was, well, there's a reason that there is addiction counseling. But let's just stop there, okay? Lest I get myself in trouble with that commentary.
Sure.
But one of the most powerful things, and it took a long time for me to get this through to some people throughout my rather varied history and work experience. There are things you learn with role-playing that you don't anywhere else. And that is, you have real interpersonal reactions. Because when someone fumbles with their character and shoots yours, you have a choice. You can either completely lose your mind and scream at them, which sometimes happens.
Yes.
But then you turn around and you have a choice. It's either going to mess your friendship up, or you're going to find a way to get over it, or you're going to die and make a new character, and you're still going to have fun. The other thing is, in these reactions, there are times characters, no matter how good of friends the players are, characters are not going to get along.
Oh, absolutely.
And the fact of the matter is, there has to be a way to distinguish. I find it amazing. People look at that and go, oh, well, that's just terrible, or, oh, it's not real, or it's this or that. But yet we expect people to be able to act on screen as though they hate each other when they're best of friends. And then this is very much the same idea, except what you're doing is you're helping to shape young minds to find ways to overcome differences.
Oh, yeah.
Because the bottom line is, let's face it, the group that can't cooperate is gonna wipe.
Oh, absolutely. And this is again getting back to the difference between, gamers and role players, because gamers will have real issues with that. Gamers will
Yes.
not be able to, friendships end over gaming.
Yes.
Friendships do not end over role playing.
Correct. I agree with you completely on that. And there was a person who I was good friends with for many, many years who had finally completely fell apart because of an issue very similar to this.
Sure.
This person just didn't like the way things were going and decided to be unpleasant. We'll leave it at that for the sake of charity.
Sure.
And I just decided I didn't need it anymore. But that is the huge difference between gaming, you're right, gaming and role-playing.
Yeah.
But real spirit of cooperation, real terms of creativity for problem solving, being able to logic your way through things, being able to learn to listen to descriptions.
Yeah.
To figure out what you need to do with your characters based on their abilities and what they know in any given situation that's totally foreign to you.
Sure.
It's very, very different. And the real, I think the part of this is it also builds language skills, because when you are describing a room or a scent or a creature or whatever you're trying to describe, you're not painting the picture with pixels.
Yes, you're exactly.
You're using your words. And the cool part about this though is, and it's both the cool part and the part that, has often made me want to microwave my dice, is the random number generation of rolling the dice.
Okay.
So no matter what you do, there's always a little bit of that luck factor.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And something that should have been super duper easy just becomes one of the most impossible things to do.
Yeah.
And, you sit there and you shake your head and you're going, my God, I'm only going to fail, if I roll the 1 or a 2, depending upon which system, or the 19 or 20, if it's low or high. But,
Sure.
You have a 2 out of 20 chance
Yeah.
to fail. And all of a sudden you fail 3 or 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
And it can happen. And then next thing you know, you're doing great. But, it's odd. It's almost like sometimes it takes a life of its own on, which is kind of cool too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But when you wrap all this together, that whole role-playing act builds more camaraderie. It binds people's brains together in ways to all of a sudden realize that each character on his own probably is going to get trashed. But all of a sudden, when you combine your resources, when you start to do, well, you can remember this. I know you can remember this. All of a sudden, we decided that we weren't going to be doing, strictly speaking, individual treasure anymore. We were going to kind of treat it as group treasure and figure out what we needed.
Yes.
And then as soon as we did that, it was like a whole new world opened up. And there were a few people who were a little upset about that.
Yes. But I don't, for me personally, and I always felt like, and this kind of goes back to a specific role-playing sort of philosophy that I have. Sometimes in certain situations, now I know for my homebrew, I know specifically that character creation was me meeting with each person individually. Yes. But my situation was completely different. I feel like when you're putting together a team to play, I feel like, and this goes right along with that, keeping everything together as a group. I feel like that should be the mindset from day one. That should be the mindset from character creation. Because if you're putting together a team that is going to be successful, and this goes right along with working together as a team, interpersonal skills, being able to communicate with people, being able to work together with people on common goals. You should have that team mindset from day one, from character creation. You should be making characters that are complementing each other. Now, how many times have we played where we sat down and when it came time to level up and allocate skill points, the first thing out of somebody's mouth was, okay, so I've got this skill and they've got this skill. What other skills do we need and who can take them?
Yes.
If you can't, that is part of the problem, I think, and that is some of the issues I have with MMOs. You're playing an MMO and you're expected to, again, I have a very limited, background to go on with this, but specifically for Final Fantasy 14, let's say, you're expected to join parties, you're expected to, complete dungeons, complete tasks, all these things, which is part of the whole experience of an MMO, playing with other people that you're probably, you're not right down the street from, and so you're building these parties and you're doing all these things, but the majority of the game is a sort of solo interaction. The majority of the game is you building your character and you wanting what you want, and in certain situations, being greedy to a point where you decide, I need this, I'm going to do what it takes to get. You're not thinking in a team mentality. You're very much thinking in a solo mentality. And I feel like as much as MMOs are about playing with other people, it's more about building yourself.
Well, and I agree.
And I don't think that works in the tabletop world. I don't think that you can honestly go into a game with a character when you're playing on a team and be 100% selfish about that character.
You can, but you're not going to last long.
Well, that's
because nobody's going to put up with it.
You cannot do it effectively.
No.
It's not built to work like that. That's why people don't play tabletop games alone.
Right. Absolutely.
Because there's just it doesn't work. So I feel like that, that team mechanic is very important early on. You've got to build that right away. I'm a huge fan of everyone sitting around at a table. I don't care if it takes the whole session. In fact, for me, as long as I'm not, wading through Dungeons and Dragons First Edition by myself trying to figure out how to build a character.
That's what I'm for.
Yeah, no shit. You are, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I very much, I enjoy just spending an entire session on character creation and putting together everybody's characters and figuring out who's going to do what. And to me, that's
some of the most fun.
Oh, it's so much fun. Like if I could just pick like 10 different games and then run 10 different sessions where it's all just character creation and then we never touch them again, I'd be like, okay, well, that's probably going to be fun.
Yeah, it is. Well, because you get to see, I think part of the joy for me, at least, and this is, very true in terms of being a game master, is watching the creative process with each of my players as they're putting a character together. It's fascinating because you'll start to see the wheels turn and you'll start to see what the personality is. And just an interesting footnote, and I'm sure we'll get into this more, if not this round, certainly in the future, the actual process by which I want to see these characters created. I'm a firm believer that a little bit of RNG is good, but your entire character should not be RNG to the point where you can't play what you want to.
Okay.
I think there's a real balance between the two.
Sure.
It's good to push people to do something a little bit out of the box, a little out of their wheelhouse and their comfort zone.
Sure.
Because that in and of itself is entertaining for me as a game master.
Oh, absolutely.
And as a player when I've been forced to do that. Absolutely fascinating. I've had a few characters where I kind of got stuck with what just made my eyes roll, and I'm like, all right, well, this one's obviously not going to live for too long. And then all of a sudden, this thing, like, it could fall off a cliff and survive. And I'm like, all right, well, there's obviously something here that I'm not seeing. Yeah. And then, it grows and it develops and it grows on you, sometimes like a fungus. But then not only do you start to like it, but you start to find the story in it.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I've had a few characters that just blossomed. It was like literally finding a diamond in a nugget of poop.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, like with character creation, one of the things I noticed, and this came from my homebrew, and I don't know what exactly struck the right chord that caused this, but you and I have played with a gamer. Now, okay, now that's a when I say gamer, I don't mean gamer as in they don't role play. I'm just talking like a tabletop gamer.
Yes.
That we have played with, and pretty much every game that we have played with him, he basically had the same type of character every game. And so then somehow, for some reason, my game presented him, and without getting into my game a whole lot, you basically had the choice to play either a quote-unquote hero or a quote-unquote villain.
Yes.
You had no idea what that meant, but you just knew that you had the chance to play either a good guy or a bad guy.
And just for the record, I have to interject this and we'll let it go.
Yeah.
I got to play a villain, which was really cool for me.
Well, and so here's the thing. So we have this guy who has basically, most of his characters have all sort of been around the same vein as, let's say, a soldier for hire. someone that was just a human tank with guns, and kind of, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the type of character he likes to play, that's great. He does it well, because he plays the, I will say, he plays the character to a fault.
Yes,
I mean, he does not relent. He plays that character exactly how he planned it from the beginning. So then when it came time to play my game, and he chose a super ultra good guy who was a lawyer by day, and I mean, I know you and I have talked about it, and when I first brought it up, it was like mind-numbingly insane. Like, it just blew your mind. Like, I cannot believe that he has chosen to play this character, and something about my game, something about the way I presented it, he looked at it and was like, wow, I have all of these options. And I believe during conversations he even told me that he directly picked that type of character because it was so different than everything else he played. And somehow something I did, or something the way I presented it somehow just made him do that. And so you get these moments as a game master. And I know specifically, again, I was trying to do everything that you don't see in a regular tabletop game. At the same time, I mean, you and I have gone over the story that I put together, because my game ended prematurely, simply because we couldn't get enough people together all the time. So we sat down and we talked about the storyline that I had put together and where I was going with everything. And I felt that I was very intricate, to the point where I did a lot of things where characters would have to sort of figure things out, and sort of have that like moment where the light bulb goes off over their head. And to me, that's a lot of fun in doing that, where you have a moment where somebody honestly looks at you and says, what in the hell is going on? And then like 5-10 minutes later, there's a collective light bulb that goes off, and they're like, oh my, I can't believe this. That is a lot of fun. Like,
yeah, it is.
It's insanely fun to watch that process. All right, so we have looked at, kind of where you're coming at as a gamer. We have sort of looked at your experience as a GM. Your lengthy background in the tabletop gaming sort of realm. And at this point, before we move on to take a look at Gamma World itself and what we have planned for this series, we're going to take a small break for station identification, and then we will be back to chat more about Gamma World and what we've got planned. All right, so we are back, and now we've taken some time to talk a little bit about personal experiences and whatnot, but now it's time to dive into the meat of the podcast here, and it's time to talk a little bit about Gamma World. And so I think appropriately, the very first place we start, let's talk a little bit about exactly what Gamma World is, for those of you listeners out there that are uninitiated, members of the huddled masses that have no idea what Gamma World is. Well, here's your dime store education.
For all of the uninitiated into the great mystery of Gamma World, really what it boils down to is this. Gamma World takes place in post-nuclear Holocaust North America.
All right.
And that's where it starts. Okay. Now, since obviously I have to fiddle with everything I touch when it comes to role-playing, is you kind of have to realize that that's where it starts. But since it is post-nuclear Holocaust,
yes,
it could go anywhere in the world.
Sure.
But we start here because obviously you're not going to get on, the plane, at your local international airport and take off.
Because more than likely your local national international airport is gone.
Doesn't exist.
Yes.
No. And one of the really cool things about Gamma World is you get to sort of pick where you're starting after nuclear war.
Okay.
You could start very soon after, where you have a lot of hot areas, where you have lots of radiation, and just barely trying to survive enough To get food and water could be a huge aspect of the campaign that you're playing.
Sure.
You can take it all the way up to where civilization is effectively more or less rebuilt. And now you've got a whole bunch of differences in societies and anywhere in between.
Sure. Okay.
For this one here, what I'm considering is something that's a little earlier, but it's not quite as difficult just to survive from day to day.
Sure. Okay.
Think of it as a rebirth of the Dark Ages.
Okay.
It's sort of
All right.
almost where I think I want to start.
Okay. All right.
And one of the cool things, though, about Gamma World is it's not just, strictly speaking, a couple of races and a couple of classes, and this is what you got. Oh, no. With Gamma World, you have 4 basic paradigms, if you will.
Okay.
One would be called a pure strain human. And these are humans they are descended from the original humans pre-war, who are in fact not mutated. They have kind of a resistance to the radiation.
Yes.
So they don't have all the craziness going on with them. The second is a mutated animal, meaning you have a larger animal or smaller, depends. There's some stories I could tell you about previous characters on this particular point.
Sure.
Where you are an animal that has mutations and you have a higher level of intelligence, but you're still primarily an animal.
Yes. Okay.
So think of about a super smart wolf
Okay. Right.
that may have other things like radiation eyes or wings or things of that nature.
Yes.
The third sort of grouping in the same regard would be humanoid. Now, humanoids are kind of entertaining.
Okay.
Because the humanoid kind of falls into 2 categories. One is a human who has mutations, be it multiple arms, wings, dual brains, which gives you all kind of additional benefits, as well as a whole host of mental mutations. So this affects in both directions here.
Right.
And then the other end of the humanoid spectrum is, in fact, an animal that is now vaguely humanoid. What I love to liken it to are Thundercats, which I know is near and dear to your heart.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So you have effectively cat-like creatures that are much more human, but they still retain a ton of cat-like features.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's rules for whether you walk on 2 legs, whether you have hands with opposable thumbs, whether you have speech abilities, and there's all kind of ways to determine this.
Yes.
And then the last one is sentient plants.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Now these, just in past experience, I've seen everything from a giant tree that's kind of like an ent, or a treant, depending upon which universe you're more familiar with, to literally a giant tree that somehow senses things that looks just like a giant tree, and it kind of crawls along on its roots, to vines that were parasitic, to even vaguely humanoid type. And here, I mean, I guess the one that most people are going to immediately think of in the world today would be Groot.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sure.
But I've even seen people play them where they're a bit more human. There was a character that was very, very much humanoid, whose skin was very green. They had to actually periodically make sure their feet were buried, to flowers would bloom in the character's hair.
Huh.
And there were some other things that went with it, and
Sure.
and there was all of this. Now, having said that, you might be asking, well, what can I use in terms of a plant or an animal? The better question is, what can't you use?
The
The list is super shorter to go that route.
Yes.
The only thing is, and there are some basic old school charts that sort of group things.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I intend to do, and in my previous experiences, I sort of did this, but I want to open it up a little bit more, especially now that we have these wonderful things called the internet, where people can research virtually anything they want to.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What I want my players, for their characters to be able to do is pick an animal that they absolutely love, they absolutely hate, they think is hysterical if they wish to have an animal, or if there's a particularly oddball plant that they think would be fun. Look it up online. Learn everything you can about it. Come prepared to character gen, and we will sit and discuss what that's going to look like.
Okay.
From everything from your natural attacks, natural defenses, to that. So literally the sky is the limit.
Fantastic.
And I like that because I've had some rather entertaining characters in history. I don't know if we want to save that for a later time, or if you want me to touch on that now. Or...
Well, okay. So I think we're at a real good point here. Rather than at this moment, which we'll get to it, but I think rather than kind of looking forward, I want to kind of look backward, and I want to look at some of the Gamma World campaigns that you've run in the past, because I think for people that are just coming to Gamma World for the first time through this, and learning a little bit about Gamma World, I think it's helpful for them to get some background information through maybe things that you have run before, campaigns that you've run before, interesting characters that you think kind of shine a spotlight on what makes Gamma World as great as it is.
Right. Well, actually, as I was talking about this, there is another critical aspect to this that really can't be overlooked.
Okay.
And that's this magical thing called tech level.
Okay. All right.
And really what we have to understand about tech level is it goes everything from, say, Stone Age,
right,
all the way up through modern, into slightly near future, into things like harmonic disruptors.
Yeah, okay. All right.
And, teleportation.
Sure.
And things like this. Alien tech, kind of.
Right.
And because at the time, one of the things with this post-apocalyptic world, this post-Holocaust world, is that a lot of it was even things like, and we hear bits about it now. It's kind of entertaining because, again, we're going a long way back for me, with things like kinetic weapons, where, the destructive power of some kind of a giant depleted uranium rod that's shot from orbit that just obliterates everything, but maybe not with the radiation. So there's everything from nuclear weapons to fusion to plasma to kinetic devices and that whole thing.
Yeah.
So your character not only has all of these things going on in terms of its, stock creature, usually how it's referred to, but you also have an associated tech level.
Okay.
So when I'm looking back at some of the other campaigns that I've run, depending upon, and this is where things get a little tricky, especially if you have a more freewheeling approach, and I do.
Sure.
I open books as little as I have to.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Unless there's a really fine point that we need to clarify.
Right.
I can't necessarily pick everything until after I see what the characters are, because if they're going to start all maybe Tech 2 level or 3, we're talking more tribal-like societies.
Okay.
They might be coming to visit a larger city. They might have some exposure.
Sure.
So having put that out there, it determines a lot, because I have had campaigns where they have begun where all the characters that were playing decided they wanted to be coming of age. And I thought that's kind of cool.
Sure.
So, one of them involved finding, the sacred tree, and, it involved, building offerings, kind of a more tribal mentality. Sure. And everything, of course, had to go sideways right away.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's just the way it works. Mm-hmm. And then that catapulted them into a whole new realm.
Oh, all right.
Not necessarily a whole new realm in the sense of like a new universe.
Right.
But all of a sudden, it was no longer just about coming of age. All of a sudden, there was a threat to the tribe.
Sure.
Which may have been related to a much larger threat to the whole area, perhaps a resurgence of something, where I've had some campaigns where all of a sudden they were being attacked by ancient warbots.
Right.
There was one of the longer ones, and this is again why I like the flexibility of this, is we even had one where some of my players made an argument and said, well, if this laser rifle could have survived, why couldn't a book of magic? And I sat there and I blinked at them and I went,
you got me.
yeah, there's no reason it couldn't have survived.
Sure.
Could it have survived in a library? Okay. And then I said, well, what are we talking about here? And, this, of course, was one of my buddies who was a big-time D&D player.
Sure.
And he says, well, what if I want to learn to cast a fireball? And I went, okay.
Yeah.
I said, can you find me a spell book that'll let you do that now? And they looked at me and they said, well, sort of. I went, really? I would love to see that. And after we sort of bantered that about, I decided that, all right, because this person wasn't the only one. They wanted some of this.
Yeah.
So I said, you guys are killing me.
Yeah.
So we slapped together a very rudimentary system. And it was meant to sort of indicate that it was kind of a cross between, I guess what today we would call a little bit of a cross between high magic and more hedge witch stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
But there were some other things that could affect damage or would mimic other abilities.
Okay. All right.
And we found ways to sort of crisscross it. We even developed a point for how much energy it took from the person to do it, depending upon the effects they wanted.
Sure.
And it was neat. But and the reason I bring that up in this is because it's all relevant to the kind of characters.
Right.
So let me start with, I don't know, perhaps one of my all-time favorites.
Okay. All right. Let's throw it out there.
And this player decided that he wanted a saltwater crocodile.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay? And I kind of looked and I went, okay. And he decided he wanted it to be mostly animal, but he wanted some minor abilities, which are was okay. So you don't really want to be bipedal, but you want to be able to rear up. So you have the strength to do that. And I'm like, all right, I'm all right with that. That makes some sense.
Sure.
And, he decided that he was going to roll for his mutations. He just wanted to make sure, and he said he wanted to be able to speak. Beyond that, that was it. But he
Simple enough.
Well, it was. And the thing is, he was really good about it because he didn't even want to be like normal speaking. He just wanted to be able to verbally communicate.
Yeah.
And kind of the grunt, the growl, and the kind of stuff.
Me no like you.
Yeah, kind of thing.
Yes.
Not because he was dumb, because his intelligence score was decent.
Sure. But, you got to be realistic about, what an animal's really going to be able to verbalize unless you're specifically
choosing that as an ability. Yes.
Yeah, if you're going to be a former English professor who's, a monkey, oh boy. That's brilliant.
That's
all right,
phenomenal.
I'm writing that one down.
Yes. Oh, I can see this. That'll be great.
Yes. Oh, man.
So this particular person decided then...
Professor Seymour Bananas.
Oh, that's going to be phenomenal.
Oh.
So...
I'm very excited about that.
Oh, my God.
This is going to organically happen multiple times, I think. As we continue to do this, I'm just going to come up with ideas for...
Yeah, it's already making me scratch my head. But in this particular instance with this rather large saltwater crocodile... was one of the things that he ended up rolling, because he did roll some mutations, and we found some additional charts to expand what came with it. Thank you, Dragon Magazine.
Sure.
He really did pretty well. He ended up being very large.
Sure.
And he did get wings that happened to be feathered.
Sure.
And he was able to use them with great effectiveness.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember what some of the other mental mutations were, because there was only one or two other physical ones. And one of them was a defect. Now, this is kind of like, whenever you think about radiation and mutations, the actual possibility of getting beneficial ones,
yes.
In real life is like 0.0001% or something
right.
ridiculous like that.
Sure.
Well, the Gamma World campaign is a little more flexible.
Yeah.
Most of them are beneficial, but you can roll ones that are defects, which are a problem.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So just like I found some absolutely delightful mutations to expand our overall list, I found some delightful defects.
Of course.
So he rolls up on the defect, and lo and behold, what does he get? Vampirism.
That's tremendous. Now, let's talk a little bit about that, because let's clarify some things.
Oh yeah, well that was going to be my next step,
Well,
because we're not talking about Dracul here, who can't handle sunlight and garlic makes him want to die, and steak, your classic steak and bake vampire.
Yes, right.
What this means is that he subsists on blood.
Yes, but what type of blood? Now, what type of blood would he subsist on? Now, could it be any blood, or would it have to be like
Nope.
crocodile blood?
No, it was able to be any blood as long as it was blood.
Okay, all
We
right.
weren't quite that vicious.
That would be tremendous.
Well, truthfully, it would have been impossible for him to adventure had it been that specific, because it's not like everywhere you go in the Gamma World area you're going to find crocodiles
Right.
running around.
Well, sure. I mean,
And although that would have been entertaining. So what we end up looking at is if he doesn't regularly consume blood, he can succumb to hunger.
Oh, that's a problem.
Which means that he can attack whatever's closest to him in order to satiate the hunger.
Sure.
Well, this character was absolutely hysterical, and I've got to give this player credit, because ordinarily when a defect kicks in, usually the person who's game master kind of has to take control over the character. I did not.
Mm-hmm.
This player did just a phenomenal job, and we had, I think there was another character in this particular group who had some ridiculous ability to run at like some obscene rate.
Sure.
However, the vampiric crocodile could fly faster.
Tremendous. Always
So this crocodile, when he decided that it was time for him to sort of lose his mind,
good. Yes.
nobody can get away from him.
Oh yeah, that's
And it was we
good.
had more than a few instances of a fair amount of cursing and swearing as somebody got bit and took kind of ridiculous damage.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because inevitably, when this character rolled because he succumbed to hunger,
Yes.
his attack rolls were absolutely like spot on. Like we're talking × 5 damage,
Right.
the whole 9 yards. Ask him to go bite somebody in combat. Yeah, okay, maybe.
Yeah, never at the right time.
No. And then, the other thing this character I thought was really kind of a lot of fun was he was so big and he was quite strong.
Yes.
So he kind of got the nickname Flatbed. So whenever the party had to cart things, they kind of used him as a mobile truck.
Yeah. Well, you got to use what you got,
And as the character progressed and gained experience and skills and things like that, he eventually was able to build up a little bit of his ability to use some tech with some training from other characters and
Sure.
things like this. And his tail was, excuse me.
Uh-oh.
Oh, it's getting late.
Oh.
I'm getting old. I'm going to turn into a pumpkin soon.
Yeah.
He had the equivalent of a shock mace that was like a cone that fit over the end of his tail. So in combat, he could then start to use this.
Yes.
And there was more than a few fumbles.
Oh, yes.
Which,
sure.
yes. And there was an instance, I remember they were running down a tower. And the tower was not in terribly good repair. And they were traveling at a particularly high rate of speed, and he happened to fail one of his dexterity checks and fell. And by the time they hit the bottom of the steps, there was at least one character underneath him who died, and that person was then re-rolling a new character in that session.
Yeah, how about that? That unfortunately that does happen.
We had another one who decided he wanted a spider. And this spider was a black widow. They decided, like, go for it. All right, I'm all right with that. So you got powerful venom. All right, well, we'll make it work.
Sure.
And they were all of about the size of a basketball.
Okay. All right.
And it was really entertaining to watch that. Again, I've seen the giant trees. I've seen your standard mutated humans with 6 arms. That gets really neat because all of a sudden they managed to roll even dual brain. So it was pretty phenomenal. So the way it ended up working, and, we sort of talked about it, I feel a little dumb right now. It was kind of like that one East Indian goddess, might have been Kali, who has all of the arms, who wields all the weapons. That's kind of what this person was like. They kind of got nicknamed the Vegematic.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, I've heard that many times.
And then I seem to remember a certain character who liked to play with tech level items well above his standard skill.
I believe what you're referring to is a character that was given a tech level item that was well above his skills and was told, here's this really amazing weapon, and you try and use it.
And
without actually saying that, that was what was said without actually saying it.
Well, the beauty of that was the fact that the character of the player kept deciding to try to use it, even they discovered the rather intensive penalties they had. I rather enjoyed the fact that this sonic weapon was Screamer rifle, I believe, is what it was.
Well, you don't exactly hand a child a rocket launcher and say, here, fire this with accuracy. Don't hit anybody you're not supposed to. Only hit the people you're supposed to. You know what I mean? Like, only hit the broadside of a barn. Don't hit anything else in the entire world. Just hit that barn and that's it. And if you can't do that, well, 30 years later, we're going to make fun of you. No, that's not exactly how it works. Listen, you cannot make a big, you should know this. You cannot make a big deal out of, oh, well, yeah, you've got this problem and this problem.
I have
this problem,
never seen
but
so many ones rolled in a session. That's
a lie because you have played with your brother.
Well, this is also true.
That is a lie. Your brother is the man that dice hate.
There is truth to that, but this particular instance I'm talking about,
yes,
sort of opened this whole world of the joy of fumbles.
That's one specific weapon and one specific instance where a character could not use said weapon. But you have to remember that what was going on was, okay, so your character has this problem, and so your character has this problem, but here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to give you this amazing gun that's basically going to be a crutch to hold you up because you can't do shit with it.
Yes, but I also remember several sessions in which I think this particular character did more damage to the party than I did with the monsters attacking you guys.
Again, not fair. I'm going to blame that on a GM not being a good GM. I mean, maybe he was having an off month or 6, but let me tell you, that's not cool. That was basically, that had to have been for your amusement and your amusement only, because nobody else thought it was funny. I can tell you not another single person at that table found humor in any of it besides you.
Oh, I believe that because they were the characters who were getting shot.
That kept getting shot. Here I am buzzing through the air, and there's like one person in front of me and everybody else is like far off, and I can't hit the one person in front of me. Like they're right in front of me and I can't hit them because I can't roll to save my life.
Yeah, that was a pretty spectacular.
That was the worst. That was the absolute worst because I believe that I probably hit every member of the party at least once during that battle. That was the absolute worst. And I had never played Gamma World before. That was my first introduction to Gamma World, and man, did that make me never want to play again, because I was like, I would go home and I would be like, this sucks. This is horrible. I am going to go back and we are going to play again, and I'm still going to hit nobody but my own party.
Pretty much.
So, yeah, but I will say this. I have graduated because let me tell you, we are going to do a separate podcast at some point on what I believe to be possibly the greatest character creation of all time. And I'm not just blowing my own horn, because this turned out to be so much better than I ever thought it was going to be.
I agree with you. I know where you're going with this one. Absolutely.
But the character of the captain has graduated so far beyond fumbles, because let me give you 2 examples of what the captain has done that have just mind-numbingly blown people's minds. First off, you have let's imagine a battle where you have giant robotic murder spiders that are coming after everyone. And so you have an entire party of people, and we're talking like 6 or 7 people at this point, and everyone is firing at these things and can't hit them, can't kill them,
right.
Can't do any damage. Now, the captain is standing there, and the captain has this giant tank standing in front of him, this giant beast that is just effectively blocking all the shots coming at the captain. So the captain's not taking any damage. But the thing about the captain is, despite the fact that he is, thousands of years in the future, the captain is ridiculously obsessed with the 17th century. And so everything he wears, he's a space pirate, but everything he wears is very 17th century. So he has all these crazy gadgets. For example, he has these sonic sabers that are built to look like 17th century sabers. And so everybody's firing away with guns and all this stuff. And the captain, who is ambidextrous, so he gets his 2 attacks per round with his 2 sabers, he's like, all right, I'll take care of this. And he takes off running and charges and kills the murder spider in 1 round. Yep. And everybody's like, holy crap, what just happened? So there's that. And then, of course, the captain had a great skill set, but the captain was not skilled in certain instances. For example, being a pirate, an air pirate ship captain, in essence, he has some navigational skills, but he has no actual knowledge of how a ship works, how to make a ship work, which is surprising because he invented a time machine. Which nobody can still believe. The presentation of how the time machine works was 5 of the greatest minutes ever in the history of gaming. But anyways, he has no idea how a ship works. So here is this ship that they find that they need to get running, and they need to get the star drive running, which is what's going to help them, travel from one place to another. And so everybody's like trying to get this thing started. Nobody can do it. And the captain says, well, here I am, I'll take care of it. Nobody else can do it again. So here's the captain to save the day. So the captain walks in there, bang, crit success on 1 roll, starts the ship, and everybody's like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
So I will say that as a player, I have absolutely graduated. My dice are extremely temperamental. We know this to be a thing. Mm-hmm. They don't hate me. My dice and I get along fine. They're just extremely temperamental at times, but they have really come through when they needed to.
Well, that was kind of like my little lizard guy, who I named Smog.
Yes, yeah.
Who was able to build this ladder to get all the way up to this hatch in this busted up ship, like no problem. Phenomenal ladder. I tried 3 times to climb it and fell every time. So I was like, yep, somebody else's turn. Yeah. Done. I can build it, but I can't get up it.
I can build it, but I can't climb it. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
It happens to all of us.
Oh, sure. But I've definitely graduated from those days. So is there anything else? That stands out to you from previous campaigns?
Honestly, it's sort of difficult. I mean, I could probably, but if I really broke it all down, we could spend hours talking about the previous campaigns.
Sure.
I would say the things that stand out the most is more of regular trends, sort of watching characters develop. Where we get to see them not necessarily take the initial arc that we expect.
Yes. Okay.
And as things happen, and it's really interesting because a person who really and truly is a role player sort of almost changes the way they process what's happening in the game from the viewpoint of their character as opposed to themselves.
Yes.
And things that could be very traumatic for the character end up sticking with them.
Yes.
And you get to see how they begin to interact with either other NPCs, non-player characters,
Sure.
or other players, or if something goes terribly wrong, in a particular session, and some of the group ends up dead, and by this we mean the characters, not the actual players.
Yes, right.
Sort of how these characters react to sometimes the bringing in of new characters and how that fits in.
Oh yeah.
These are the kind of things that tend to stick out to me even more.
Okay.
And really just watching that. The other thing I mentioned, and again, it's more general, and I'm trying to avoid over focusing on the specific, because again, we'll be here till tomorrow.
Sure.
You really watch the game take on a life of its own. And I guess this is where, and I don't really mean to shift gears here too much, but I have to say this. This is where, as a game master, you have to be absolutely and totally flexible.
Sure.
Because one of the things that does stand out is every time we got together, it was pretty obvious that that group was supposed to go east. Inevitably, they'd be going west. And I would sit there and I go, all right, guys, need 15 minutes.
Okay, so let me just throw this out there, because you bring up a really interesting point, and I think that has to be one of two things. It either needs to be a coal region trait or an our town kind of trait, because honestly, and we have and we'll get to this shortly, but we have played with some groups of local players, for some time now, and that is a reoccurring trend with every group that we play with.
Yes.
And they're either all specifically from our hometown or coal region based. It just seems like that is a trait that somehow every single plan that's in motion for a group of players inevitably gets turned upside down on its head, and we do exactly the opposite of what the game master anticipates we are going to do.
Yes, every time. And to be fair, I think that's one of the things though that separates the folks who run the game, and separates the guys who are creating a real story and a world and environment for the players to interact with.
Sure.
Because honestly, some of the best sessions have been when it's have to be completely winged, like right off the cuff, because they have just gone somewhere. And any good game master has a list of tools and tricks to kind of nudge people in the right direction.
Sure.
And there are times where it just doesn't work. People just like, nope, or they've decided that they've taken a whole different view of things, and you'll sit there and you'll blink at them and like, I have no idea what logical chain you used to get to that, but okay.
I know exactly what you mean. One of the sessions I had ran in my homebrew, I basically put every single person separately in the same situation. I gave each of them a specific choice. They had a situation presented to them that they had to handle. And in planning that, I really sat down and thought about what each character was going to do. And I had a very specific plan for some of the characters, because I was like 150% sure that this is how they were going to react to this situation, and they didn't. And I had what probably could have amounted to a 10 to 15 minute interaction between these characters and the situation that they were presented. It was this big, long, drawn out thing, and I had contingency plans for everything I thought they were going to do, and I never got to use any of it because they just were like, nope, I'm good.
Yeah.
You have got to be kidding me. Like, you're just going to take it and be like, nope, I'm good.
Well, but part of that is, and this is true, and I mean, we're talking about homebrews. Let me tell you, every time we sat down to play mine, there was a reason I had only bare sketches of where I thought things were supposed to go.
Sure.
Because it never went that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. I mean, I enjoy that. But where I'm going with this whole idea is, I'm trying to think how I want to put this. It's a game master who really wants to let the players shape the world that they're playing in, has to understand the world.
Yes, exactly.
And if as a game master you understand the world and some of the major players that are in it, then in building the story and building the campaign, you're almost letting your players fill in the blanks.
Sure, yeah.
And it really helps to shape it. It tailors it to whatever group of people you have.
Sure.
The old home, and again, I don't want to get too bogged on this, but the old homebrew that I was playing with you guys for quite a while is one that I have used elsewhere.
Yeah.
And to be completely honest, it had a totally different feel, totally different approach. The only thing that was similar was setting and maybe the major characters, like the non-player characters that were kind of shaping things as things were going along.
Right.
But it was a totally radical difference. And it was all based upon what you guys did as players,
Sure.
backstories of characters and things like that. So I think those are all really critical points. And from our discussions, I'm kind of psycho about understanding how the world works.
Yeah.
Everything down to the metaphysics of it in
Sure.
some instances.
Yeah.
But the more of that you have, you can then adjust and adapt more easily no matter what they do, because you know kind of what the physics and metaphysics are
Sure.
of the realm of the world.
So let me ask you this, because this is just kind of on this point that we're kind of discussing. It goes along that lines. So are you more, as a GM, are you more comfortable playing running a homebrew, or are you more comfortable running an established game? Because for me, I never wanted to run a game. That was never my thing. I always wanted to be a player. I never had ambitions for that. And then all of a sudden somebody was like, well, I think some people are going to be taking a break from running their games for a little while. We have a slot open, do you want to do something? And then I started thinking to myself, all right, well, what am I going to do? Because my concern, if you are going to be a successful GM, at least in my opinion, there's a lot of different hats that you've got to wear. And there's a lot of different, especially if you're playing an established game, something D&D, Gamma World, whatever it may be. You're playing an established game, and so you're the be all end all of what is going on. So you have to understand the mechanics, you have to understand the rules, the world, because ultimately you're the source. Forget the books, you're the source. And so you've got to have a good understanding of that, because if somebody says to you, well, this is what I want to do, and you're like, well, you can't do that. Well, why can't I do that? Because it says right here in the book that I can do that. So you as a GM have got to make a decision. You've either got to be like, okay, well, I understand that the book says that you can do that, but here's why I'm telling you can't do it. This is my understanding. And ultimately, you're the GM. So what you say is the final, but you don't want to be like, hey, this is why I'm telling you can't do that. And then players are like, oh, well, this kind of sucks. Like, they don't enjoy it as much, because they're like, well, I understand this to be the rule as the book says it, and now you're telling me it's something completely different. And to me, that's just not as fun, because I have taken the time to learn and understand the rules. So to me, there was a lot of things to understand and know and kind of, be prepared for. So for me, when I decided to run a game, I decided to do my own, and I felt more at ease with that, because the be all end all was me. There's no book, There's no written rules. There's just me. And so, I ran a game with a world that we had created together, something that we had other plans for, but decided that it would work as a tabletop game. And so for me,
which I have to interject, really did well.
Yeah, surprisingly,
that was spectacular. I was that character is by far one of my favorites of any that.
Yeah, I think the mechanics and the way that I went about it sort of helped make it more enjoyable because, I let everybody do basically whatever they wanted with their characters as far as putting together a character. I let them pick all of the powers, and everything that their character had was 100% from them. And I told them from the get-go, I will almost never say no. If you come to me with an idea and you can explain it to me and tell me why you think it's a good idea for your character and why your character should be able to do this, I will almost never say no. I might say to you, okay, well, this is something that is really kind of powerful for a character to start off with, so maybe we'll start with this and build our way up to that, right? Because I think one of the innovative things that I did was, rather than having people level up and getting skill points and buy skills or whatever that is, the whole leveling system was based on their individual powers and their powers getting more powerful. But when that happened, I also said to them, okay, so now you're leveling up, so now your power is going to gain an ability, or it's going to get more. What do you think that looks like? And I let people decide. But then at the same time, I built the story around exactly what they were doing. I had a rough idea of what I thought the general topic of the session should be. And then, because I had literally, with the exception of, I had a sheet for every character, because every character had different mechanics, so I had to know what was going on with each character. With that exception, 0 notes. Not a single note on a piece of paper did I have at all regarding anything about the game. I booked on the fly.
Right. And actually, but see, the part of it is you knew the world. And the thing is, you also had, this is not a phrase I ordinarily like to use, but it's not because it's bad. It's not normally the way I look at it, but you had very clear story arcs.
I did.
And think about it. So in the story arc, you were going from point A to point B. How you got from point A to point B really didn't matter. And I don't mean that it was like just, whatever. I mean, you left that up to how the players were going to do that. And ultimately you were able to guide it back to point B. and you did that without fiddling with 100 things. And the thing is, that is again the mark of someone who, when they're running a game, is comfortable with controlled chaos.
Oh, absolutely.
And I mean, and let's face it, the group, for the most part that we had, it was all about managing controlled chaos.
Oh, certainly.
And it was also larger, and that's one of the other things that sometimes people get nervous about. And I will say, with your homebrew and mine, having 10 people around the table was no problem. We were able to keep people engaged. We did move from sections to sections. People broke off. Yeah. But nobody had to get up and walk away and go find something else to do.
Well, yeah. And, specifically with my game, to go back to the A to B point thing, it felt organic to the player, because getting from point A to point B was all written. Basically it was all shaped by what the characters did, so it felt organic to them, to the point where they didn't know that getting to B was where they were supposed to go. They had no idea, because it felt so organic. It felt like they were moving themselves to point B without even knowing that that's where they were supposed to be going.
There was way back when there were some guys we played with that we used to call storybook role-playing, which meant that you were limited with what you could or couldn't do because you had to play within the confines of a story.
Okay.
Now, that is sort of the negative view of what you're talking about. Creating the story is something very different. And I'm highlighting this because the thing is, I think the way that was done was very much correct. You have a story, but again, you're letting the players write as much of it as they can,
Sure.
without it getting completely derailed.
The other thing I thought was interesting, that I was surprised that worked as well as it did. I mean, it was my ultimate goal, but for it to work out as well as it did, because it goes back to the point where you brought up, nobody had to get up and walk away and do something else. And what was interesting about that was, essentially I was running two different stories at one time.
Yes, you were. Yes.
Because I had essentially two different sides of the same story. And yet somehow I managed to make all that work. I mean, you had characters that had, and this was, for me, this was one of the fun things, because this was something that I worked really hard at putting together. You had two different sides of each character, because you had the character as their, super powered self, but then you also had the character that had a day-to-day job.
That was a fun session. By the way.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was, I wanted to highlight, I basically wanted to run an entire session where people played their day job. Now that sounds boring as shit. I'll tell you right off the bat. Why would I want to go to a gaming session and play work? Well, let me tell you, I took essentially 8-9 people, and I took each one. Now, they organically came up with their own jobs. I gave them no specifications whatsoever. I said, you can have whatever job you want. The sky's the limit. Pick whatever. I took all 9 of those jobs and weaved them together into one storyline. Every single job connected to every single job through a storyline. And for me, coming up with that was like the most fun I had as a GM, was just watching people connect the dots as they see how everything is connecting together. And people were making choices about their characters as far as what they do, that they didn't even realize that they were making choices that could connect as easily as they did.
There was no
because everybody did it separately.
Yes,
Nobody
exactly.
knew what anybody was doing. Like it wasn't like we sat around.
There was no collusion on any of it.
No, absolutely not. Now, I mean, once everybody put cards on the table and everybody revealed, who they were and what they did and what powers, there was obviously a lot of planning going on there, where we're like, okay, well, this person can work with this person great, because these two powers combine and connect, and we can do these. I mean, you guys came up with some really creative ways to use the powers.
Well, I will tend to say I thought Team Batty did a really good job.
Well, you guys can. Well, that's specifically. We had a character that had an electric ability, and you guys came up with some really creative ways as far as working with computers and short-circuiting things. That you guys came up with some great ideas. I mean, some really cool stuff as to how these powers could relate. But it was just fun to see. It was different. It was something that I guarantee you. I know somebody's going to prove me wrong, I'm sure, but I can guarantee you there's not a game out there where people have come to a session and role-played work for an entire session and actually had fun with it.
Yeah,
I mean, you'd be hard
shocked to. I'd be really hard pressed to find that.
Yes. So I mean, that's but I never wanted to, which is hilarious that we sit here and we talk about all these things that went right with this, because honestly, that was the first campaign I've ever GM'd. And it was a campaign I created from scratch, and it was something that I was never super interested in doing to begin with. So it was like surprising that it went all that well.
But see, the thing is, just not that I wish to redirect things here, but back with your original question.
Yes.
In terms of established versus your own. I think a good GM makes whatever they're working with their own. And
okay.
here's one of the things. And I have to use kind of the Dungeons and Dragons stuff for this, because this I think is the clearest and the easiest.
Yeah, easily relatable.
There are very, very specific genres or Dungeons and Dragons worlds. You've got Greyhawk, you've got Ravenloft. Those are the two I'm most familiar with. There's a number of other ones.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So when you're working in, say, Greyhawk, or you're working within Ravenloft, there are certain world events and things that go on, which if we have time, I might digress to one story about Ravenloft, just to prove that I've had my moments as a player character as well, since I was picking on everybody else. But you're confined by certain things, be it, Strad von Zarvich is this great, terrible vampire, who's done all these things, or very specific deities within Greyhawk, or certain differences in classes or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. But how it plays out is up to the GM. One of the things that I like about homebrews is you are literally taking another system, or the thing is, in your case, it was phenomenal because it was its own system, which I thought worked just exceedingly well.
Sure.
We relied a little bit on some of the D20-esque things.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
But
it wasn't
it was,
strictly speaking a D20 system.
No, it was just a basis to build off of.
Well, and that's the key with a good homebrew. You're going to take a mechanics system that works. So that way, it's even better if everybody understands it.
Yeah, well, it was something that we were relatively
right,
we had just been using in another
Yes.
game, so it was relatively easy for everybody to just jump on board.
Yes, and it gets the mechanics out of the way. Be it the homebrew, which was kind of dark matter-esque,
Yes.
the one that I used. I have to say esque because it kind of really diverged from it.
Sure.
Versus whipping out the old Gamma World stuff. It's almost different sides of the same coin. In reality, because you're taking a system and you're adapting it. The difference is when you're sticking with a particular world, if you will, like the Gamma world or the Ravenloft world or whatever, when you're sticking with that, there are certain limitations that you have, but you accept that knowing that going in.
Sure.
Whereas when you're doing a homebrew, you never really know what the outer limits to that are.
Right.
Now, what I personally love, again, is sort of stapling those two together. It's like, how far can we push the outer limits of what this is to give people the most space to really create some amazing, fun characters.
Yeah.
And I guess this is a good opportunity for me to say this is, if you're not having fun with a role-playing campaign, stop it. Start all over. Make the changes.
Sure.
Adjust what you need to. It should be fun.
Yeah.
And story role-playing is good as long as you're not forcing the story. Letting it organically develop with the right little oomph. And sometimes you got to rewrite whole scenes in order to bring people back where they need to be. Like running away from, the people who are supposed to be helping you and fun stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are stories. But it just, to try to get people back where they need to be.
Sure.
The other thing that I always like to stress this, and this I think is a good opportunity for me to put this out there, because growing up, some of the game masters we had treated it as though it was the players versus the game master.
Oh, yeah.
And I always thought that was the dumbest thing in the world, because the game master holds all the cards.
Yeah.
I mean, no matter how you look at it, it's ultimately going to be a war of attrition that as a player you can't really win. Okay. And while and I'm sure you're going to throw something at me as I say this, while I enjoy Arkham Asylum because I expect to lose, that should not be. I'm
rolling my eyes for those of you that can't see me, because I'm just, I refuse to have conversations about Arkham Asylum that have anything to do with positivity. I think Arkham Asylum, they should recall it and just burn all the copies. I'm sorry.
I enjoy it, but that's just me. But the thing is I expect to lose more often than not, but that's the way the game is set up. It's meant to be very difficult for the players to win. In a role-playing situation, it shouldn't be the same thing in terms of the deck is so stacked against the players that the chances of them, because oftentimes winning is just surviving.
Sure. Yeah.
Where every third time you get together, you're making new characters because everybody's, dead. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. But it gets old after a while.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You know, I believe a real game master is the one who sort of controls the world, presents the story, is almost like a narrator. Where the game master should not have a vested interest in the success or failure of the party's endeavors.
Sure.
And if you can keep that neutrality, for lack of a better word,
Right.
you get to sit back and you get to watch this unfold. And what you're doing is you're actually seeing, and again, I apologize for some of these descriptors, but it's like watching a flower bloom or a plant produce its fruit. You know, I mean, let's face it. If you really watch it over time, it's pretty miraculous how all of a sudden that apple appears.
Sure. Yeah.
And then when it's ripe and it's ready, and then everybody gets to share it. Well, that's kind of what the role-playing experience should be. Now, does that mean that characters can't die? No, they can. You know, stupid is as stupid does.
Right.
And I've seen people do some things that earned their characters Darwin Awards.
Sure.
And it is what it is. But 9 times out of 10, they're going to do that on their own. As a game master, I don't need to encourage it.
Oh, right. Yeah. People just, I don't know, for as much as people get invested in characters, they get seriously careless with them for no reason at all. And then when they're re-rolling and lamenting over the death of someone that they really enjoyed playing and they really put some time and effort into making them what they are, and you're just like, well, you know, this is on you. This is not me.
Right. And now, by the same token, then, you know, I don't think a game master should go out of their way to execute a character.
No, definitely not. That's,
Of which, you know, I have some personal experience.
Sure.
You know, when your character walks out of a building and without any warning whatsoever, you see your game master pick up a dice, roll it, and say, you've just been shot in the head and taken this much damage. And you're like, okay, that's twice my total hit points. I guess I'm dead.
Yeah. That's a story for another time.
It is, but I bring it up just simply for the fact that, you know, don't go out of your way to, a good GM doesn't need to go out of his way to execute characters.
Sure.
Because, you know, 9 times out of 10, if a GM even has the urge to do that, I'm going to argue that they've already screwed up and it's their fault.
Yeah.
Because if a character has reached a point of power or is that annoying, that means you haven't controlled the situation. You know, way back when they used to call some of this Monty Hall gaming, and I've been in a few campaigns where it really was Monty Hall. I mean, we had characters running around with like more magic than the gods themselves.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's fun. I mean, you don't take them real seriously.
Right. Yeah.
You enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah.
But when you get into a real serious kind of session, if you're, again, as a game master, if you just feel like you need to off somebody's character, you've screwed up.
Yeah.
And that is not on the character or the player who now happens to really get into this. Nah. You know, if again, let their own arrogance and stupidity be their guide.
Sure.
You know, right into the discard pile.
Yeah.
But you can't be doing it
Sure.
just because.
All right. So, looking forward. Okay, so we already mentioned that we have recently been playing with some local groups. One which was sort of a amalgamation of our desire to play and someone else, a friend of ours, who had some other people who had a desire to play. And so, you know, we put together this group, and it was a small group, and it all of a sudden blew up, and we found all these other people who were looking to play. And of course, the other group was some old friends from back in the day that, you know, banded together to attempt a run at first edition D&D.
Well, okay, no, not to be fair, it was a blend of first, second, because there was a little bit of
but it
edition.
wasn't. But it wasn't originally. Originally, it was supposed to be first edition, but when we started looking at certain things, people wanted to go in certain directions, and so people were like, "Hey, you know, I think we're going to have to look up some of these rules in second edition," and so. Ultimately, though, I mean, you know, it was
95%.
Yeah, it was like a first edition experience, and you know, that kind of fizzled away to a point, but may someday rear its head again. But this gives us a healthy group of varied players to kind of put together our team from. And so in the coming days and weeks and whatnot, as we actually plan to get this thing rolling and kind of make our plans, we'll be drafting some people to come in and sit down and play with us, because this is gonna be a unique experience for us. We've never really done anything like this kind of experiment. I mean, I know that this has been kind of the norm with some podcasts and some YouTube channels and things like that. People are live streaming D&D and all this stuff, and so we're just gonna give this a whirl here, and hopefully we will put together a team that will be entertaining and fun to listen to, and maybe someday even watch. So we're going to be working on that in the coming weeks. But looking forward ahead to our Gamma World session here, our campaign. What do you think we can expect? What can you tell people that?
Well,
I mean,
we can expect to try to keep it PG, but I say that a bit tongue in cheek. I mean, one of the things I will say about our group is when they get frustrated, it gets colorful.
Oh, sure, yeah. There's definitely that.
I think I'd like to think that the storyline is going to be engaging. And it's going to involve pretty much everything from robots and nanotechnology and cybernetics, all the way through things that I don't want to give away too much.
Oh, sure, no, I understand.
Are certainly going to look like magic.
Excellent.
Now, the one thing I always put out there, I'm always a little uncomfortable when I have to sort of throw this caveat out, because people immediately make, a lot of assumptions that are not true. One of the things I will say about a lot of the campaigns that I do run is that they are not necessarily entirely kid-friendly, not because we go out of our way to be ridiculous, but there are times... bad guys should be bad guys.
Oh, yeah.
And let's face it, not every bad guy is Maleficent.
Yes.
Not every bad guy, is Jack Frost, who apparently is a hero now. Not every bad guy is going to be someone who's just going to be cute and misunderstood.
Sure.
And I'm a firm believer that if I'm going to have people trying to chase someone down because they're a problem, they're going to be a reason that they're a problem.
Sure.
Which means they're going to be doing some heinous things. It doesn't mean that these heinous things are promoted. Au contraire. There's a reason the group quite happily wants to bury them.
Sure.
So I just want to sort of keep that in mind.
Yeah.
My general rule of thumb is if it can happen, it can happen. Be it good or bad.
Yeah.
And extreme circumstances produce extreme experiences. So I like to throw that out there at the beginning.
Sure.
So this is definitely not a bedtime story. This is definitely not going to be Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. But likewise, I'm not entirely sure it should be John Wick.
Sure. Yeah, you got to strike a balance there.
Yes.
All right. Well,
by the way, I like John Wick.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite shows.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. So, looking forward here, we've got a little bit of work to do to get our campaign and session up and running. I believe the next time that you hear from us will be our character gen session, where we get all of our players together, get you a little introduction on who's going to be playing with us, and we'll get into some what I imagine will be some very interesting character gen.
Yes.
I feel like Gamma World, more than anything else, probably has the most interesting character gen that I've seen, just because of all the different possibilities and things that you can sort of come up with, coupled with what the game kind of gives you in terms of what you can do with these ideas. And I think it's really interesting to see where people decide to go with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the only thing is I'm thinking we might not want to turn this particular group into a rather massive one, because I think it's going to be a lot harder to manage.
Probably.
Just in terms of recording and time.
Sure.
So just to sort of give our listeners, I guess, a little bit of an idea, this is probably not going to be the mega group.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a smaller subset.
Group. Yeah.
Just to make it more manageable.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that'll work out. I think that'll work out really good. So yeah, the next time you'll hear from us will probably be our character gen session, which ought to be loads of hilarity and fun, I'm sure. But for now, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. You can follow us on Twitter at Mancast Network. We're on Instagram at Mancast Network. We used to be on Facebook. I have no idea why we disappeared from Facebook, but we'll be back on there again soon at Mancast Network. If you have anything you would like to discuss with us, anything you'd like to ask us, ideas, suggestions, comments, hit us up on social media. We're also available, mancastnetwork@gmail.com. Make sure to put something interesting in the subject so I'll read it. But yeah, we're all over the place, so go ahead and like us, follow us, send us your email suggestions, let us know what you want to see, what you want to hear, let us know what you think is going to happen with this campaign. If you've got ideas for characters, send them my way, because I'm already planning on playing 2 characters, because I cannot give up Professor Seymour Bananas. I have to do that, but I need to play another character. So I'm particularly looking for a plant-based character. So if you have any really good ideas for a plant-based character, send them my way, and maybe I'll use it. Who knows? But we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up. And thanks for listening. And we hope you enjoyed our little introduction to Gamma World and our adventures in radiation. And we look forward to bringing you more awesome content. So thanks for listening, and keep following the Mancast Network.
Hey, thanks for watching this presentation. Like, share, and subscribe for more.